Hello and good afternoon, everybody.
There you go.
My name is Cam Amir. I am with Cribl. I will be taking over for Chris O'Brien, and with me I have Ed Bailey.
Hey, thank you very much. My name is Ed Bailey. I'm Cribl's field CISO. I just want to say we're really missing Chris not being here. He had a family emergency, and so Chris, we're thinking the best thoughts for you. But we're here. We will be here in spirit. We will try to sound sophisticated as you do, but we will fail. But we will try our best. And thank you everyone for being here.
Yes. Thank you again. And for this session, we're going to talk about how Sophos used Cribl to modernize their data security for their AWS data and other data sources. So first things first, just kind of put the agenda out here. We're going to talk about the challenges that they faced, the solution they came up with, the outcomes that came from this solution together, lessons learned, best practices. We're going to do the best we can, obviously channeling our best Chris impression. Quick demonstration, and then questions and answers. So please feel free to ask us some questions at the end.
So to tell you a little bit about Sophos. Sophos is just a company with an enormous footprint across the world, specializes in MDR, analysts and coverage, 600,000 customers, just unbelievable wave of data. And where Cribl comes in is to help secure the infrastructure, help secure the software, help give Sophos the ability to control costs, but also provide better solutions. So it's really important. This is for a key global company and just one of the more phenomenal security vendors out there.
Absolutely. And about Cribl, so Cribl is a late-stage startup. We've been around for about 7 years. We have roughly 1,000 plus employees. We've been in the data space for quite a while. We kind of pioneered this data pipeline, telemetry data solution. And we're backed by a lot of leading venture capital firms.
So the challenges that we all had was just the exponential telemetry growth. We see for most companies, 30% is common. Sophos is more like 60. So much data, and that generates a corresponding amount of data coming off the systems that needs to be collected, needs to be secured for observability and security, and just an incredible diversity of sources as well. Every cloud, every endpoint, so many types of data, and this is something we see in the IT space, IT and security space. It's the wave of data, it's the diversity of data, it's all coming out of there. And finally, then cost. And then the legacy tool sets just cannot keep up. Sophos tried very, very hard to build its own set of tools, a collection of commercial, a collection of open source, and the engineering cost wasn't sustainable. The cost of SIEM wasn't sustainable, the storage cost wasn't sustainable. And they needed to look for something different. And this is where Sophos then came to Cribl to start looking for something new and a way to solve these challenges.
And this is a story that we at Cribl have heard many, many a time. From what we see in the industry, roughly 30% CAGR year-over-year growth of data. Telemetry data is primarily what we're talking about here, logs, metrics, traces. And there's also an additional component here where AI is starting to kind of kick up even more data that's being generated at scale. And both of those are kind of leading the charge as far as how much data is being generated. But everybody's budget typically doesn't grow at the same rate. What we're seeing is that the major difference between what the data growth looks like and what their budgets look like is significant. And that's kind of where Cribl is found.
Yeah, but add on to that, this is something that we see a lot. This has been going on for quite some time. The oldest conundrum in IT and security is, I got 2 terabytes of license and 10 terabytes of data. How do I make this work? I never forget, this is just before I discovered Cribl completely by accident in 2018. I get pulled into a meeting with my CIO complaining about, well, you're spending so much money. And I thought I was doing pretty good containing costs around 30% when my logging volume was growing 200%. And the irony was I'd just come from a meeting with a bunch of VPs complaining about I wasn't giving them enough data to do their job. And so this is something we feel deeply. We see everyone's out there because you need more data, you need to meet all the challenges, but how do you maintain the cost? So, and that was something that was just really unique, was being able to thread the needle between manage your data, but also have better quality, because at the end of the day, high quality data solves problems. Less data doesn't solve problems. Good data is what solves problems, and that's where Cribl comes in.
And that's kind of where Sophos came in and started to see the value of Cribl.
Right.
And with that, they're able to start to see these kind of
Exactly. And then the modernization was huge. Being able to start replacing piece by piece. Displacement costs are a huge issue in any enterprise. You have some vendor that comes in and says, yeah, you got to replace all that stuff right away. You got to install our agent everywhere. And the cost of installing agents, like for me, early on, if I had to put a Cribl agent on 200,000 endpoints, it just would not have happened. But instead, I was able to start simply by the idea of I could put a couple hundred stream servers in place, use the endpoints, the sources I already have, and start getting value, and then grow my footprint over time. So now I can manage my displacement costs and get fast value. I think, and later on, you'll see that how completely transformative that was. And when Sophos then put Stream in place, and then they started to push the Cribl Edge agent out a piece at a time. So they were able to then manage the cost, but still get value from the entire solution. And then they started working for optimizing for volume, cost. This is where I think data tiering is incredibly important. You always have to think about that. Here's my data set, and this is where people get in trouble with monolithic SIEM vendors is you have to put all your data in the same place. Typically, your SIEM is going to run you about $1 a gig. And you have to always ask yourself, does all the data in my SIEM, is it worth $1 a gig? And more often than not, that's not the case. So you always have to look at, what's worth $1 a gig? And if it's not worth $1 a gig, we need to start looking at putting it somewhere else. You work with a lot of customers. What do you see with, especially with data tiering solutions, that makes sense for most customers?
Absolutely. I mean, it starts with the legacy solutions that they have in place. So we back up a little bit and say, look, I have a bunch of syslog servers. How many of you love going into syslog servers and modify configuration files multiple times? That's not exactly what I call a fun job. So here, Cribl can kind of put itself in place to help fix that one problem. And then slowly look at your WEF, if you're trying to collect Windows events, WEF, WEC. That's a joy to do. Oh, I got the wrong certificate, I got the wrong configuration set up. So here's another solution that Cribl can come help with. And piece by piece, when you start putting these things together, then you can start going down the path of now that I have all the data that I need, or at least a subset of the data, I can start optimizing that data. So all the debug files, all the debug logs, all the things that are generating so much waste in my SIEM and so much waste in my infrastructure, I can start to tune that out and make it so that I'm getting way more signal than I am noise. And that's where we start to see a big plus for Cribl. And
that's a key piece by having Stream in the middle, being able to understand, okay, this is my detection event, this is my IR event, this is my compliance event. Being able to understand your data and then route accordingly gives you that power to now scale, so that you can make sure that, hey, we're going to drive the best quality data, we're going to power our detections, get the best results, but still maintain control, have all the other data. I think last night, I thought I put it really well with the idea that there's data you have to have, there's the data you might want, and there's the data you don't want, but you have to take it anyway. Yep. Split it up like that, start using Stream, then start managing, start putting the data where it starts matching cost and value. And so then you can that way you can then focus on how do I get more value from my SIEM. And this is another big project for Sophos, was migrating off their SIEM. SIEMs are risky. You see it all the time where companies will routinely come to us. We spent 2 years trying to migrate to a SIEM. We started problems. We couldn't migrate. Now we have 2 SIEMs. We don't like this. And this is the thing that the idea about Stream was so powerful. This is something I discovered early on. This is the same thing with Sophos. The idea of my data is coming through. I can put a copy of my data to my legacy SIEM. I don't disrupt my posture. Nothing changes. Then I fork a copy of that data over to my new SIEM. So now you have the entire production volume going to your new SIEM. You can now start building your content. You can now start validating. Did my legacy SIEM get a hit? Did my new SIEM get a hit? Back and forth to make sure that your content works. This is an underappreciated issue. SIEMs are complicated. You got to validate. You have to cover your edge cases. You need more data. So having Stream in place makes that possible. And we just recently, with a really large insurance company, they were on a legacy SIEM provider for about 10 years. We helped them migrate to a next-gen SIEM option in about 5 months. This is something that previously just would not have been possible. And so we were so proud to then bring this and help Sophos do the same. Anything you want to add about that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So a lot of the times when you're talking about a SIEM migration, you talk about this hard cutover, right? Where you're saying, okay, I'm on my legacy SIEM, and now I'm going to go to a new SIEM.
Yeah, the Viacom Dios moment.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. So all of a sudden, you turn on their agents, their collection things and going on, and none of the detections work.
Exactly.
None of the dashboards light up, and now you're kind of up some creek without a paddle. Here with Cribl, you're, forking the data across multiple SIEMs. Actually, we had a couple of customers that have tried multiple SIEMs in a POC to pick the one that actually worked best for them. So again, giving you that choice and control of your data, you can see that in any SIEM that you want to try out. And it leads to customers having a much more satisfied approach to getting their SIEM and then being able to cut over to it in a very soft and kind of easy manner.
Yeah, we've had a number of customers that they'll cut over to the new SIEM, but they'll leave the data to the old SIEM going. I had one CISO just like, I want to see what happens for 30 days. I want to make sure that we didn't forget something. It was really powerful because at the end of the day, when they're ready, literally go to a button inside a stream, you turn it off and you're done. And it makes that transition to a new platform so much easier. It's easier in your teams, it takes the risk away, and also from a cost perspective. It's not unheard of. You're even for a small SIEM implementation, you're going to be paying $1 million a year. And the idea is that, I'm not going to be able to get value from my SIEM implementation for 8, 9, 10 months a year. So that's an entire $1 million potentially you're not getting any value from. And being able to accelerate that process to say go to 5 months instead of a year, you're now recovering that money, you're now recovering that value for your company.
Yeah, especially if you're talking about the ARR model now. Before it was like, okay, I paid for a license, I got that license, I can let it sit on the shelf. If I buy a SIEM now, I have 3 years at least, maybe a year, to get that thing to be valuable for me. So if I can accelerate that so that I can actually start getting value from it from day one, and thankfully with cloud, it makes it a lot faster, because I remember the days of Splunk where you had to go set up indexers, set up search heads, and do that fun dance.
Right.
Here, you have everything running in the cloud. Only thing you're missing is getting the data to the SIEM.
Right.
Now we accelerate that, you start seeing value, your boss sees value, your boss's boss sees value. Suddenly that investment in the SIEM and investment in Cribl is well paid for.
Right, and that's why we always talk about the idea of solving problems with better data, options. That's where choice of control comes in. And it's an important concept. So, but always remember the idea about data tiering, matching cost and value, and then de-risking your SIEM migration. There's nothing worse than being stuck with a SIEM that you don't want. And so this is the idea of making a modular component, gives you a lot more options at the end of the day.
And now, here's kind of the way that it all happens. So what I'm going to show you this is our portfolio for Cribl. We have Edge that effectively sits over here on the source side. So if you have an agent, great, you can still use your agent to get data into Cribl. We can also use Edge, which is kind of a replacement for an agent, to get that same data transited through Cribl Stream or directly to your destination. Then in the middle is our flagship product, Cribl Stream. This is where the magic happens. We effectively are using that to collect data from sources, any typical protocol we can collect the data from. We can then transform it, route it to multiple destinations, enrich it. We can also look for PII, and if there's any sensitive data, take it out, encrypt it, so that it doesn't land in your SIEM. Great story about that one. We had a very large company that was sending PII to their SIEM, big no-no, and they had to basically go back, take the data out of their SIEM, this was a fun one, replay it with Cribl after they sanitized it. Cribl was able to sanitize the data, put it back in the SIEM, everybody was happy. Compliance was restored.
What a nightmare.
I know. And then the other two components here, very briefly, we do have a lake offering. So this allows you to basically leverage object storage at scale with your organization with built-in role-based access control. This makes it so that lighting up an S3 bucket is typically fun in an organization where you have to ask for the right policy, the right roles, the right retention policies. All of that's built into Cribl Lake. We also have the ability to accelerate that data in Cribl Lake with Lakehouse. So you have fast search. And finally, you have Cribl Search, which kind of is the umbrella across all of these components that allows you to query the data at rest through APIs, a lot of very fun things. We actually have a new integration with Security Hub, so come by our booth. We'll tell you more about it.
And so how Sophos is using the Cribl portfolio, starting with Edge. And this is, I've managed thousands, tens of thousands, probably close to 1 million agents in my career. Managing agents is a true pain. There's probably few things that waste more time than trying to manage agents at scale. And the thing I just love about Edge is it centralizes all that complexity. Get it installed, you now have a policy-based way to manage everything from the same place. You can upgrade it, monitor it, understand your data, you can customize it, add scripts, do everything you need, all from one place. It gives you scale, it gives you ease of use. And most importantly, when I was an engineering manager, the idea is that how you can then I can have junior people manage this. I don't need someone senior who's figured out the YAML syntax of the day. Just make it easy, give you what you need, get your data, and move your engineering time off your endpoints and move your engineering time to getting value from your data. Also using Cribl Stream, so Cribl Stream in the middle. So Cribl Stream is getting all the data, all the sources, including from Edge, and then giving that ability to now parse, enrich, tier this data, route this data as we share it across the enterprise. This is something at the end as we start going through our demo is to start showing the value of sharing data throughout the enterprise. I think that's really underappreciated. Every time that you share data, you're now compounding the value. You take something as prosaic as firewall logs, can help solve problems for the SOC, the NOC, your DevOps team, your network engineering team. You may laugh, but you would be surprised how oftentimes network engineers don't have access to their own logs. And so these are the kind of things by just share data, get more value from it, and Stream's in a unique position to share data across the enterprise and do it safely. I think that's a key. As we work with security teams, the idea that here's the pieces we can share, here's the pieces we can't, and Stream gives that ability to do so. I've really been impressed with how sophisticated Sophos has gotten and just in being able to make sure that they're maximizing the value of their data. Because then at the end of the day, you have to go back to your business and show, what's the point? You gave me all this money. How did I benefit the business? How did I move the business forward? How did I save money? How do I enable new capabilities? And when you start speaking the language of business leaders are much more likely to invest in you, invest in your program. It's just really important. Always remember, you've got to move the business forward every day.
And one more thing on this slide. Actually, two more things. Number one, there's actually AI built into Cribl where it keeps the operator in the whole process here. We're not going to put you through a black box and say, hey, look, magic's going to happen. We're going to help guide the operator to get their job done. So the AI components allow operators to build a proper pipeline, and you're right in the middle to make sure it's done right. To maybe write a natural language query that makes sense, that you can actually pull data and understand what the data is that you're collecting in Cribl Lake. So we have all of that, and the best part about all of this is that you can actually try this out yourself today with a free Cribl Cloud tenant and, see the value for yourself with your own data. We do have a free tier up to 1 terabyte of data per day, so I want to make sure you remember that part.
Yeah, we got to remember to say AI a lot too.
Yes.
I mean, look at someone counting in the audience how many times you say AI. So we got to, but that's part of the issue. And I think this is something I'm really pleased with Cribl's approach to AI. How can you use AI to help your users just get more value from the tooling? The search interface is wonderful. I owned a large searching platform and had 5,000 people using it, and keeping everyone trained was a nightmare. And so having AI in place for a Cribl search, the idea is you have your own personal helper of how to find your data, how to search your data, suggest a better query. Miracle upon miracle, when you make a dashboard, it's going to help you make an optimized dashboard by default. You're not going to have to know about the magic of a base search. And so these are the kind of things that just help just get more value from your tooling. And this is also as we're starting to roll out more agentic workflows to now find the data that matters. There's a background helper that we're about to load up into Stream to help look for data that might be of concern. AWS access keys, PAI, PHI, all sorts of different shapes of sensitive data that you may not know are there. It's just little by little help solving these big problems to help make you more productive and at the end of the day get more value from your data.
One of my favorite features, by the way, this is a little side note, is within Cribl, whenever you make a configuration change, there's a Git repo behind the scenes that gets updated. Normally, it gives you a little text box to say, okay, go ahead and type out exactly the changes you made.
Right.
Forget that. There's a little AI button that you push that'll actually tell you all the changes that were made in that configuration modification, puts it in the Git notes or the commit notes, and there you go. Simple little things like that, so that 6 months from now, when someone goes back and say, what changes happened here? You actually have legit notes, not I configured Cribl, send. It's actually something useful.
I know I spent years yelling at my engineers and in code reviews about not writing notes, and now you have a little button, makes it easy. I mean, they would literally write me notes about, F you, because I'm not doing this, kind of thing. So, I mean, these are the ideas that, use AI to make your lives easier, make the tools easier, and get more value, and especially get it faster. Let's talk about the outcomes. And this is something I think and this is why Chris did such an amazing job with rolling out Cribl. I mean, 48% cost savings within the first 30 days. That's awesome. And this is the idea that start being able to show your bosses, that dramatic rise in cost. Here's how we can put fast, immediate, and real controls around it. And this is where governance comes in, because there's a whole program to make sure to look at your data. Always look at your IT and security data. It's changing, it's churning. Make sure you understand that. So constant looking, constant reporting what's there. Data independence was one thing I was really impressed from a strategy standpoint that Sophos implemented early on. The idea from a first principle standpoint, we want our data to be portable. We want it to be useful. We want it to be high quality. And this is the idea of data independence, I think, is so important, because too often with modern SIEM vendors, you got a proprietary agent talking a proprietary code or protocol to a proprietary backend that runs a proprietary search language. The idea by making all this portable and independent, it's my data. It's not my vendor's data, it's my data. I can now have my data inside of a data lake. I can now use something like Cribl Stream to do a replay, to put my data into Splunk, Elastic, Databricks, Snowflake, take your pick. I can use that data anywhere I want to. It's no longer stuck. And so I think it's a very powerful idea of how we can get more value from your data, bring the discipline to too many that you see all the time in BI institutions of business value, bring that discipline over into the IT and security side, and you can see enormous value. This is where we started in governance. Secure by design is something I think Sophos is very proud of. They spend a lot of time making sure that their software, their hardware are secure. Unlike some other vendors that seem to make an RCE, a feature instead of the bug, they're very careful about that. And so that's something they do early on by making sure they're instrumenting everything. Coming into Cribl, they're looking for things all the time in order to make sure everything we release is secure by design. And finally, the idea of, so we've talked about better data. Now we can maintain cost effectiveness. So we're showing value, but also managing within our budget. And that's very, very important.
And one thing about cost effectiveness, I just want to kind of double down on this one. Typically, the reason, if you remember the first chart I showed you, 30% CAGR growth, and it's exponential. One of the things that you're trying to do with this data is you're trying to basically make that hockey stick chart look a lot more manageable, a lot more like your IT budget,
right,
where it's predictable. So you can start taking data that you didn't get before, your proxy logs, your DNS logs, all those rich value data sources that you just can't afford to put into your data destinations, actually affordable again. So this is kind of the big win that you have with something like Cribl.
Yeah, and that's really important. So I'm going to double down even more. The idea is that you're rarely going to have less. So you have your established budget. You're getting in trouble because you're going 25% more every year. If you can get it down to 5%, because most businesses accept there's going to be 5, 6, 7, 8%. That's just unavoidable. 30% is a problem. You're rarely going to get to less. And so the idea is flatten out that cost curve, and that way you can then talk about here's how we can get more value from your data. Collect the right data, control it, but still maintain your costs.
Absolutely. Yep. And now, one of the most important things I think most practitioners here are going to come for is the lesson learned and best practices for this. So here's what Sophos was able to learn.
Right. This is something I think it's important for everyone. Have a plan. You're not going to get a single control plane across all your data on day one. Just not going to do it. Have a plan, a long-term plan. The idea of byte by byte, we're going to advance across the enterprise, across every line of business to have a consistent strategy to collect your data. It's always important. Think long-term. Plan long-term, and then attack that little by little, because it makes what would ordinarily be an enormous project a lot more digestible. And so this is one of the big lessons. It's important to have that visibility. Imagine you have a data plane across your entire organization where I can see where my data is coming from. I can see where my data is going to. I can detect if a data source is down. I can detect if the data source is degraded. Anyone who's been in any kind of incident has figured out all of a sudden my data source stopped working. It stopped working 3 months ago, and the only time you found out is because now I need to look at it. And it's typically very difficult to monitor. So having that centralized data plane gives you a lot of options. Filtering and optimizing data early, I think, is important too. Where this is also from a long-term perspective. Start building up, and as you look at your data, start building up a long-term backlog of, okay, this is what we want to do with our data. Here's what we can do. Here's what we want to do. One of the big struggles is, especially with data that's being used, is you got to work with your users to update your content to reflect new formats. And so you have to have this careful planning and communication process. Like I did with my team, I had these thousands of users, so we had communications of every couple of days, we started rolling out changes. We notified our users, we managed our risk, and kept moving forward. And so just make sure you have a plan to do that. Another big key as well, and this is something I really appreciate with Sophos going into data tiering, is start looking at the data you're not using. I will guarantee you, if you look inside your SIEM, you're going to find 20, 25% of the data that's not getting touched in 90 days. That's the first thing you do. If you're not using it, don't put it in your SIEM. Move it into your data lake, and now you've freed up 25% of your SIEM and without any kind of disruption. So just really look at that long term. And I think that first principle everyone talks about with data tiering is match cost and value. Is the data worth the $1 a gig? If it is, absolutely, that's what the SIEM is for. If it's not, put it somewhere else. And finally, the phased migration approach, which we've talked about. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, on that data tiering piece, most SIEMs are running on very expensive disk. And without even talking about license cost, right. The disk cost, yes. The people cost to get that data in, it's not cheap. And if you can save on those as well as, potentially a license help, I think that's where you get a real big win, just long term.
Yeah, we've seen this repeatedly, even with companies that have an ELA for their SIEM, for example. They're still saving tens of millions of dollars by moving data that they're not using out of their SIEM. And that's just from the storage and compute cost alone, especially if you're hosting it yourself in cloud. The costs are just astronomical from an OpEx perspective. So I always take a really hard look, and from a governance perspective, every day understand what people are using, what people are not using. Yep. In order to just have some controls there, and then also make it part of your onboarding process. Have a set of, the idea that you have to be able to say no. Like, this data has no value, we're not putting it in here. This is where the governance and policy process is really key to just help provide answers, because otherwise you're going to drown in data, you're going to drown in cost, and eventually you're going to have that meeting with your leadership who aren't happy.
And I will say this, when you have a centralized approach to this logging solution, that immediately gives you options. That also gives you the little more control of this data, and you can make it repeatable so that you, the security operations person, is not going in and having to build these pipelines, build these things. You can actually push this down to maybe the application owners. So now they have the ability, with the tooling in place, to build these repeatable processes to onboard applications, onboard things on their own. And so it becomes less of a burden on you to do it.
Yeah, and I think that's a big thing as teams mature using Cribl's tooling. The ability to expand and become a service owner becomes key. And this is also, I encourage everyone, it's not just a security solution, it's also an IT and observability solution. Huge chunks of data. And the thing is, I've seen there's a lot of crossover. Lots of security data gets used by ops teams, lots of ops data gets used by security teams. Yep. And having it under a common control mechanism gives you a lot of power and a lot of flexibility.
Absolutely. Now, let's take a look at what the tool looks like.
Yeah, this is really fun. So this is the dashboard that Sophos uses. So think of it as a heads-up dashboard to understand what's my consumption. Are things working? Are we seeing load issues? They have a much more detailed dashboard, and this is something I encourage everyone to take a look at Cribl Cloud. We have a new product called Insights, which is going to give you a much more expanded view of this data. It's AI-driven, and it's also going to give you a lot broader view of your data. And so this is a very natural, very natural way of expanding what we're doing with their data. And so before, this is all very blind. This is something Sophos really struggled with. It's something if a data source stopped, they just typically didn't know about it until they needed the data. And so this is the idea is, how do we bring in this data? How do we get this value? And you can clearly see, you can see the data coming in versus the data going out. And so they're able to get it's just a lot of value, going forward.
Great point. And obviously this you can see on your own Cribl Cloud tenant when you go download and play with it, right?
Absolutely, and this is something just really great. So if you don't want to, from the Cribl website, you can get a free Cribl Cloud tenant. Click a few clicks, you're going to have the full suite. So that's going to be Lake, that's going to be Search, Edge, and Stream. We also have options for what we call our sandboxes. So sandbox.cribl.io, where click another button, you can have a guided use case through using the actual tools that are hosted in AWS, so you can get an idea, does this make sense for me? Trying to address this, several use cases, and that's the big thing. Does it make sense? You want to get your hands on the product. No one's going to bother you. You're not going to have to go through sales to get it. To get access. We want to be able to put this out there and make it as easy as possible. So this is really fun, and so the idea first we talk about is we have what's called a route. So as data is flowing through the system, it's flowing through the system, starts from the top to the bottom. You're now looking for a filter. And you can see where the idea that we're looking for user auth events, and we're now going to redirect any event that contains this string, we're going to put this into a pipeline. Do you have anything you want to add about it? What are common best practices?
Yeah, for the most part, when you start with Cribl, you'll see, filter equals true, so you're basically all your data. But as you start to get refined and understand how to properly route the data based on what you need, you can start building your filters. One of the best features of Cribl, which is what kind of sold me when I was kind of coming to Cribl, is the fact that you have helper buttons on each one of these steps. It'll actually pull in the documentation, still have the UI, but I have the documentation sitting right next to you. So you can actually do, oh, how do I do a JavaScript filter in regular expression? Here's how you do that. So very, very helpful.
And one thing I want to point out of this, and this is something that's common, so Sophos drives from this one route, drive detections, drive audit, drive compliance, and so that's that idea that I'm going to help drive, I'm looking for pieces. And this is something I think is misunderstood. You see a lot of times, like, we're going to do detections in the stream. More often than not, what you're doing is you're picking out interesting data and highlighting this may be important in order to stitch it together in the back end of your SIEM. And that's one thing that Sophos has done a really nice job of finding those interesting events and then raising the visibility to their SOC with their new back-end SIEM tool. But then from an audit perspective, they're now retaining it, driving it into their analytics platform, so now they can query it and understand it from a higher level. And the idea is you don't have to do this all in one place. And this is, I think, a perfect example of breaking it apart and making it more service-based to give you more flexibility.
And here you can basically see kind of the progression. They're adding multiple routes, they're adding multiple kind of filters so that they can properly diagnose the data, send it down to the right pipeline, leveraging packs, which we'll get to in a minute, which kind of just helps accelerate the adoption of these data sources that also make it repeatable.
And one of the cool things that they're doing as well is they're pulling data from their next-gen firewall. They're now adding enrichment to it. I think it's a very underappreciated part of the better data story. As data comes through, let's make it better. Let's add context to it. And one thing I did, this is from an IT perspective, is we started adding in Playbook. So we had a well-recognized error message we would add in using a lookup. We'd add in a link to the wiki playbook that then the NOC team would use to then react. And we did the same thing with security. So we're always, how do we make data better? How do we make it more actionable? And this is a really great look at how they're doing it with their firewall tool. And so you can see as it's coming through that you're sharing data. And so the idea is to start with the top, and then notice that there's a little button called final. And that's the idea is once the data hits the right filter, it's finalized, it doesn't fall through. One of the fun things you can always do is, especially as you share data, is flip the final flag. So now the copy of the data falls to the next route, and that's how you enable the ability to share. Imagine where you start with, my first route goes to my object storage, my second route goes to my SIEM, my third route goes, say to Kafka. So that's the way you can put the same events in 3 different places and have full control over where it goes. And so this is something that very high volume. This is a great example of this with this pipeline in particular. They were able to get something like 60% reduction by just making a simple change about how they manage the data and how they classified it.
Yeah, always very powerful.
Yeah, and look at the way now you're structuring your data. So this is a good example of how from the idea of, I always want to talk about detection engineering as being the end result of good data engineering. So, but what you're seeing here is now Sophos has chopped up an event, they've added structure to it, and this is also one of the fun things that you can, depending upon the backend SIEM vendor, you can actually accelerate these fields as well by doing this. So not only do you get a better format, it's more searchable, typically it's going to be smaller, it's also going to be more consistent. This is something that Sophos didn't do this, but also I encourage you to consider fixing your timestamp here as well.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Yeah, normalizing your timestamp is very, very powerful. And so just the idea of every time you run into a data problem, this is where you look to fix it.
One of my favorite stories around the timestamps, we were talking to an executive for a very large security firm, and they came to us and says, why do we need Cribl? And clearly I was like, have you ever had an issue with the timestamp? Do you know that people don't always use UTC,
right.
use time zones? And when you go look for an event, hey, magically it didn't exist until you do either all time or you go look in the future. Oh, look, there's the event. What's it doing out there?
Yeah, I'll never forget I got called to a bridge and their new application that they had deployed in Central Asia wasn't showing up. And the data was exactly 11 and a half hours off. And I'm thinking, to the millisecond. And you're looking at the data, and an hour later, it suddenly hits me that the developers had hard-coded the central standard time zone into the log into something that was deployed in India. And so that was the kind of thing where this, timestamp controls were really important. So after that, never trusted a timestamp ever again. And so the idea that if the data is coming through Cribl, Cribl's going to, the idea is I'm going to fix the timestamp, I'm going to fix the time zone, and then I'm going to alert me that there's a problem. Because it's just a fundamental issue of you always need better data to solve problems. And like time zone timestamps are still the devil.
I mean, I can beat this to keep talking about this for a little bit. There's one customer that I had back in the day where their developers had 15 different ways of doing timestamps, literally 15 different timestamps.
Yeah.
So yeah, good luck finding that in your logs.
Exactly. And so these are key things. And I think also want to mention that from a detection engineering, they're actually ripping apart the output of netstat. If you're looking at netstat as part of standard out, you wouldn't think that was something that was very easy to structure. But this is an example by essentially running the script, you get the output, and by using this exact same template, they were able to get the structure they needed, make it repeatable, and get just because there's so much you can do with that kind of data once it's structured correctly.
So this is part of the kind of conversation where we have like question and answer. I'll skip this just to show one more thing here. We'll definitely have a question and answer section here. But really quickly, just wanted to reiterate the fact that Cribl has our university training, which is free training and certification. You can go get it. You can go tell your friends about it. And you can also get these certifications that employers are actually asking for these days. It blew my mind. I was at Cribl, both of us were very early on. And when we saw that people, like companies, are actually saying, hey, we need a Cribl level 1 admin or engineer level certification to get this job or to apply for this job, blew my mind. And I was so proud to see that.
Well, I mean, it's just free training. That blew my mind. I mean, as a customer, I spent hundreds of thousands of dollars and additional money paying to learn how to use tools I'd already paid for. And so that was just, I was just like, really? I mean, that sounds like too good of an idea. So, I mean, it's just, and I know with your customers, you see the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
The idea that Cribl, we try to look at the idea is the better you know how to use the tools, the better results you're going to get, the better the relationship. And I think that's the way it should be for everyone. I think training is everything.
And our docs are also not behind a paywall. So
yeah, that too.
Always a big win.
Right, and also from the AI perspective, you can always ask Copilot, and the Copilot will look up the docs for you.
Yep.
So it's really nice. And we already mentioned sandboxes. Sandboxes are a great piece because it's just, you want to talk about data reduction, routing, you want to talk about putting data into object storage. It's all right there. You're going to have a really nice, rich way of walking through it and get hands-on right away. Just a 10-minute investment in order to try all these different use cases out.
Yep.
Thank you for coming. And we're going to be here for a little bit. So if you have any questions, please come by.
Yes. Thanks so much.
Thank you.